Hello and welcome. This is Kelly from Crafty Kellys at www.craftykelly.co.uk. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a really fun masking technique for my background where we mask off part of the card using a masking sheet. The one I have today is from Rare Earth. It's from an old pack, so I've had it a while, but you can get them from Crafter's Companion and other companies. I will link a description of the products I've used on my blog post, so if you want to go and get them from Amazon you can. So I also have the Tim Holtz Deca Edge trimmer, which is really fun with that kind of jaggedy edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out my masking sheet using this trimmer so I can get that jaggedy edge effect for my project. So at the moment I'm kind of like figuring out how much I'm going to need, how big it needs to be, and I decided I actually don't need too much of it, but I'm going to cut off two edges to create a center panel on my card. So now I'm going to bring in my cardstock and attach my masking sheet to that. Now the masking sheet has like a sticky back, so it's got a covering on there which I just need to peel back so I can actually position it onto my cardstock. This is particularly sticky. I don't know if I've left it in sunlight or something, but it was a bit tricky at one point to get some of it off, and I got really sticky fingers. But the nice thing about these sticky sheets are, because I've got it overlapping, I can actually stick it to my surface while I'm working. So if I'm stenciling or stamping and I don't want that particular bit of cardstock to move, it holds it in place just like masking tape. So hence masking sheet. Really useful kind of thing to have in your stash of crafty goodies. So as you can see, I'm just positioning it on each side because the center of the card is where I want to add my color and my texture and like my stenciling and stamping. So I'm just kind of weighing up how big I want to make that area, and then once I'm happy I will just stick it in place and leave it there because that is fabulous. I can work, it's not going to move. I'm really happy. So for this project I decided to choose a piece of ephemera from the Crafty as a Fox Victorian ephemera collection. So that was my first collection that I brought out, and I wanted to really match this minty green that's in this butterfly. So I've got my colour wheel out so I can see what the complementary colours are. I've pulled out some of those colours to have next to me, so then I can really choose what is going to work for me in this project. I also have a couple of extra dark, like a dark blues or dark greens to kind of, if I want to darken up some of the edges, maybe, you know, just, you know, make that kind of shaded look. What I'm using to apply my ink is I'm using these blending brushes. There are so many different ones out there now. I've tried most of them and I still use most of them because it's whatever ink has gone onto that blending brush usually sticks with it. I find with these particular blending brushes they apply ink very smoothly but quite lightly, so you have to, if you want to make an area darker, you've got to go in a couple of times and apply the ink. But they are really good. But I also use the sponge daubers and I also use the sponge applicators. So it's really whatever you've got in your stash that works for you. You know, there's so many out there now. But anyway, so I've added a bit of orange in here, and I will put a list of all the inks I've used on my blog post, so you can go back and see them if you want to. So this is where I'm going to bring in a darker green just to kind of darken up those edges at the bottom, give it a little bit of depth and a different bit of interest just for those colours. And then we will move on to the next stage. Now I'm going to start bringing my stamps and stencils into this project. So I'm going to use a stencil on that coloured area which we've masked off and we've started to colour. I'm going to bring in some black soot because I want the stenciling to really pop out of that particular panel because we're keeping the sides white. So I'm using the Crafty as a Fox stencil 1, and we're going to be concentrating on the number section of this stencil. This particular stencil has 3 areas of interest: cogs, numbers and cracks. But for this project we're going to concentrate using those numbers. So I'm just going to load my blending brush up with some ink and just gently work that colour through the stencil until I get a nice even coverage through. I will have to move the stencil down for the next part. I did just slightly skew with it and then put it back into position again, so we're okay. So I'm really happy with how the stenciling's come out. The black soot works really well as a kind of that contrast of bright colour, and black just looks really lovely. But I am going to bring in one of my stamps. So from Crafty as a Fox, this is the texture stamp 1. I'm going to bring in the script stamp that is in this collection. It is really such a brilliant stamp for adding script to your backgrounds because I love script, so it always like makes a project look great just using that in the background. So I'm using that to go over the area we've just worked in again. So I've still got the area masked off. I've done my colour layer, I've done my stencil layer. Now I'm going to work doing a stamped area. Now as you can see, I'm not using a block because I'm not fussed about it being a perfect impression. I want that kind of messy half stamped look, which what we love in like our mixed media world. So I'm liking the way that my panel is looking. I've brought in my ephemera piece just to see how it fits in, and I kind of feel like it gets a little lost. So the way that I'm going to work around that is I'm going to create a layer in between using some circle punches. I've got here a 2" and a 2¼ inch punch, and I'm going to cut my first piece of cardstock out with the 2" with some white cardstock just to create a little bit of a layer. I don't really like the harsh white, I think it's a bit much, so I decided to use my script stamp just to add a little bit of script onto that white area just to break it up a little. This is why like the script stamp is probably one of my favourites because I always reach for it to kind of add that texture, break up an area. So useful. I kind of feel like that's a little bit better, but I kind of still feel there's some more I can do. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit more stamping on here, and then I'm going to get some black cardstock and cut some out with the slightly larger punch, so I've got a really nice matte and layer to work with because I love black, just kind of makes things pop, doesn't it? So I feel like that sits better for me with the composition of the project. For the last step of my background, I'm going to create that kind of bleached ink lift effect. So easy, and especially with Tim Holtz inks it works really well. So you spray your water over the project, little droplets, and then you mop it up with a paper towel or something. And what it does is, because the ink is on top of the card, it just reacts with it to lift it off. So then you get that kind of bleached, kind of washy, splodgy look, which I love. Now I'm going to remove those masking panels to reveal the actual background. I'm really happy with how this is looking. I love the kind of white panels down the side with that pop of colour in the centre, those blacks, the greens, the oranges. I'm going to frame my work with my black cardstock because I always love to use black to frame my work, so I just think it makes it pop. And now my white circle doesn't look so much out of place because I've got those white areas on the side of the card. I'm going to bring in my sentiment, and I always have a little play with where it's going to go, and I'm really happy with how it's looking. So now we're going to need to stick it all together. So last thing I need to do is to adhere all my project together. So I'm going to use some double-sided tape. At the last second I decided to add a little bit of ink to my circle, just that lovely kind of minty colour, just to tie it all in. But once I've done that, I'm going to add some foam pads to my sentiment just to lift it up, and then add my focal point to my project. So now I've done my project, I've used all my stamps, my inks, to create this, my ephemera. I'm going to bring in my card journal to log everything that I have used. If you'd like to learn more about card journaling, head over to my website at www.craftykelly.co.uk, where you can find more information about my concept of journaling, also my books. There will be a blog post available with all the products I have used for today's project. Thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.